Anita Walker, Executive Director of the Mass Cultural Council, and welcome to our Culture Chat today. Our guest is Christopher Schroeder, who is Executive Director of the Josiah Quincy Orchestra Program, and we are here today to talk about something that may sound simple, but really has a lot of nuance to it to make it work effectively, and that is, how do you teach music virtually? How do you teach it online? Sounds like it should be pretty straightforward. Music teacher says, play this, student plays that, music teacher criticizes, student does it over and over again, like what's the big deal? But not only has Chris found effective ways to teach students one-on-one, but you actually are even teaching groups of students as in a children's orchestra. So welcome to our program.
Thanks so much for having me. This is wonderful. Thank you for the Mass Cultural Council for putting this kind of service on.
Now, let me ask you, first of all, obviously, we are very, very concerned about all of our cultural organizations, and the Mass Cultural Council is rolling out some really, hopefully, effective relief programs for individual artists, teaching artists, and our organizations that are suffering greatly in this pandemic. But meantime, people are discovering new and innovative ways to do their work, some of which may actually carry on beyond the pandemic. Had you ever thought about or considered technology such as Zoom and virtual lessons before this presented itself to us?
You know, certainly not in this, not to this degree. You know, we at one point had compiled a list of music tech resources that students can use at home. There's apps like Keezy, which are free for kids to use and sample music. You know, Accordion is another one that I like to use a lot when I'm doing my own workshops on music tech. And so we had that on our website already. And when it came to this kind of scenario, we began to explore what this would look like if we transition the entire program to a virtual landscape. So it's, you know, we were kind of ready. I don't think we were ready for the extent of time that we're now in a break.
Well, I have to tell you, a lot of us, and I know you work with children, but a lot of us grown-ups are only learning how to use Zoom for the first time. We tried to have a little social hour at our office, and everybody came on the Zoom, and everybody was talking at once, and nobody was hearing anything. So I can't even imagine what it's like for you to assemble a group of children to have a music lesson, to have an orchestra practice. How does that work?
Yeah, you know, we experienced some of those challenges just in the first day, you know, learning about unmuting and muting and so forth. But, you know, I have to tell you, when our administrative team, which is basically Catherine Poplardo and I, put our heads together, you know, she was really instrumental in thinking, well, you know, we can't put 30 kids in one space at the same time. So let's break up the group in half and or in thirds, you know, and so forth. And so we spread out our 28 teaching artists. And so every single morning, they have an hour orchestra music huddle, as we're calling it. And that is working out really well because you've got 1 to 8 or 1 to 10. In some cases, it's a little bit larger, but it seems to be pretty manageable with everyone muted initially and then kind of controlling some of the host settings.
So, all right, so let's dig a little deeper into that. First of all, tell us, what are the ages of the youth? What are the ages of the kids? What instruments do they play? And kind of walk us through one of those huddles.
Yeah, sure. So, you know, I think we serve pre-K through 7th grade currently. And the huddles are broken up into their subset orchestras. So we have 7 different groups. And then a special needs component, which is kind of a different landscape altogether. I'm happy to share some of our strategies with that, with special needs students. But the 7 groups are kind of segmented by age and ability. So you have a K1, K2 group. You've got K2/1st grade group, and so on. And basically we're just breaking it up. The directors are creating the content and then disseminating that to the teaching artists, and then each morning, one class, for instance, for K1, K2 might be identifying the different elements of or different parts of their instrument. or they might be learning new songs and listening to music in a similar genre and creating their own picture of the characters that they hear in the music. For older groups, they're doing a lot of active listening, as part of their work, and literacy worksheets and these sorts of things. So, ultimately, it's about a 1 to 10 ratio, and broke up by levels and ages.
So I can imagine, and I can remember my own children. I can't remember myself at those young ages, but it is kind of hard to sit still and pay attention and listen and learn and stay focused when the teacher's right there and can come over and tap you on the shoulder or say, come on, look at me. What are some of the strategies you're using online to keep that focused attention?
Sure. Yeah, it's, having those clear objectives. A lot of what we talked about, just as a staff, or, we're talking to them about, ways you can just get the maximum amount of energy and work out of the time you have is really just going back to just good practices as a teacher. The virtual landscape is a reality, and it's one that we have some, troubleshooting, setting up hosts only settings and disabling the chat function on the side, and understanding the difference in annotated markings that students can write and disable those. So there's some things that we've done to help set up a successful classroom. Some of the challenges, just as an aside, were students were figuring out how they can write on the screen and draw mustaches on the teachers while they were presenting, or take over the whiteboard and that sort of thing. So that was setting up those that virtual landscape for success. But really, it comes down to establishing routines, clear expectations in this virtual landscape, identifying the items that students will need at the beginning of these sessions, so that they're prepared. At the beginning of this session, like a recipe before you go cooking, you're going to need 2 pieces of paper. You're going to need a set of colored pencils and your instrument close by, so they feel like their space is ready. And then sharing out daily agendas and distilling these learning targets. We at the JQOP, we have these I can statements, which is, I can play this, or I can demonstrate this, or I can identify that. And all of that is online for parents to have access to. So, if a child or a student, or a parent rather, wants to see, well, what are the goals for this week and how can I best support? There's 3 goals for each orchestra and each instrument. And so that's some of the strategies that we've been using to just help to make it more of a productive learning environment.
To digress slightly from the instructional and learning agenda here, I can imagine that what you're doing is also really sort of a refreshing connection for the kids to see their friends. I mean, everybody has to stay home. I know they love playing with their brothers and sisters or being with their parents, but they miss the kids they used to see every day at school. So tell the story of your 5-year-old son when he participated in one of these. Sure.
So this virtual landscape is very new for all of us, and just figuring out how to use the mute function is tricky for all ages. But imagine trying to explain that to a 5-year-old, who is, when we first set up JQOP Online, it took us a couple of days to get the website up, and then kind of the nuts and bolts of ensuring that we were doing it in the appropriate manner and so forth. And so after about 5 days, we convened in this first orchestra huddle, and immediately you see on the screen, just as all of us do in our first meetings, all of our faces are popping up, or maybe we don't realize our screen's on, and we're adjusting our cameras and so forth, and immediately my son is lighting up, oh, so and so, hey, or look at my toy, or this is what I've been doing. Just telling this for 2 minutes, just going off as if he hadn't seen these kids in a year. And we realized the whole time his microphone was muted, and he just was frustrated. He was like, I can't see, I can't hear any of my friends, or they can't hear me. And so there's been some learning challenges with that, and teaching them how to use the mouse to scroll over, but then also setting our teachers up with success so they can deliver this content. So if they're asking for a specific instruction, they add a physical motion to it, or in 3, 2, 1, everyone's going to hold up their artwork, and so, okay, 3, 2, 1. And so they, these clear expectations really help to create a more of a safe and calm environment for the students while they're engaging in this virtual learning.
So is it possible, and this is a question I've heard on a couple of our chats, is it actually possible for all the kids to play together, play their instruments together in a Zoom huddle?
Yeah, I would say no. There's the delay is just too great. Sometimes it's a whole beat off. And there's some free apps like Acapella is kind of a popular one now. If you've seen, artists overdubbing themselves, you see, 3 different video images of the same person playing different parts. That's a free app on Apple devices. And there's some other sequencers, Logic and so forth, that's available. But yeah, it's impossible to have it line up exactly.
So sometimes a teacher might be sitting here thinking, well, I really want to keep my private lessons going. I really want to keep my connection with my students, but I'm somewhat intimidated by this new virtual world. Can you give us sort of like the top 3 mistakes and the top 3 pleasant surprises since you've embarked on this?
Yeah, sure. So probably top 3, mistakes or kind of areas for improvement for folks is some of the things and observations that I've seen, just, not specifically with JQOP, but in a lot of these different sessions, the space right before, or it's different than having that in-person interaction where you're kind of in the space. You're just in your room and you're totally attentive to the words or the lack of, speaking. If there's dead air and silence and so forth, that's felt a great deal on this side. So, having a plan offline in advance is really important. Kids are hanging on every word because it's really the only thing they have that's pulling them away from their toys or wherever wherever they are in their room. So having a clear plan, I mentioned adding visual cues, using private chat. If you're, group teaching and you're trying to share information with another colleague, as much as you can, kind of do it offline or share it in that private window. The other thing too is understanding that we have a very unique lens into our students' homes. And, if they're not equipped to set up their virtual backgrounds, then there's a lot of information that as teachers we're seeing. And I think it's really important for educators in any capacity to just focus on delivering content. You're there to teach this music information. You're not there to comment on the things that you see in their background or what they're wearing or what they've decided to eat that morning. It really should just be focused on delivering content and understand that this is a very unique situation that we're in, especially for ensemble-based, community-based arts and any sort of nonprofit organization.
And conversely, it appears to me, and as I'm looking at your very clean and crisp background, I can easily be distracted to wonder, what is that thing over there right to your, is that a book? What is that? I mean, and so as a teacher, you don't want that stuff on the screen either.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, you kind of, you mentioned earlier about, setting up these, design classes of how you can orchestrate your background so that you look sophisticated or you look this and that, and I'll be honest, I've done that before, where you kind of, you have a session or a video you need to record and where's my instrument? Where's it? Put a cello behind me, quick. But yeah, I think keeping a neutral background is important. If you can do the virtual backgrounds, I'll indulge everyone. This occasion I like to roll out.
It's a good one.
It's a fun one. Or San Francisco is the classic one. Those are always, fun to play around with.
Is that a good way to get the kids back to focus attention if they become too distracted by all the other things that are going on in their homes?
Yeah, right. It's always a risk, because the minute they know they have the capacity to, be in Symphony Hall with a lion behind them, that you start losing the virtual attention of the whole class. So, I'm sure it's fun, to explore like, virtual background Tuesdays. And, not necessarily focus on delivering content, but maybe, having that as a space where you can just, unwind with the kids with some very clear structures and questions that you might ask them, everyone, share out what's the last thing you ate, before you got on here, or why, or something fun like that. Or if there's any sort of music they're listening to, it could be a fun way to spice it up with a virtual background.
You talk about being in the homes of the children and sticking to business and, focusing on the purpose that you're there, which is to teach. But are there opportunities? Do you feel like, in a sense, your teaching relationship with the children is now visible to their parents? It's a way to engage the parents more.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. I think, for longest time, we talk about art for art's sake, and we talk about the importance of these music organizations or these art organizations and so forth. But I feel like in this virtual landscape, we're really realizing that the secret and what it is that we're truly doing is developing relationships, developing a community, a network of individuals, old, small, short, tall, that are all here to support one another during difficult times. And, I think it continues to lean back on what it is as an organization that we believe in. And community is first. And then second is, whatever art discipline or music discipline that you want to deliver content through. But, first and foremost, it's about building community. It's about building a network, a safe space for young people to thrive and feel confident in whatever they do.
I want to just take a minute to mention, because I know we have quite a few people who are listening into our conversation, and we're so glad to have you. But do know that if you have questions for Chris, if you're new to this whole Zoom like I am, there's a QA button on your screen, and feel free to just click on that and shoot any questions our way, and I'll relay them to Chris, especially if you've or tell your experience if you've taken a shot at virtual teaching and what you've run into, good, bad, or indifferent. We'd love to hear from you as well, be part of the conversation. Chris, one thing that does occur to me that's, I think, also important beyond the community building, but back to sort of the educational component of what you're doing, is we already know that summer vacation is where a lot of learning is lost. A lot of forgetting happens over the summer, and then the kids come back to school in the fall. And there's a lot of having to revisit a lot of material that you finished up with as summer began. In a way, you're sort of bridging what could be a lot of lost time here. We don't know how long kids are going to be out of school. We know that some school districts in some states have just plain closed until next year. So that's going to be an enormous amount of lost time and fertile time for forgetting. Do you feel like this is really going to help kids keep that momentum going and therefore stay connected to the music?
I think there's definitely a part of that, of this is, folks are saying this is the new norm, and I think this is still the temporary norm. And I think it's really important to not lose sight of that, just like this idea of social distancing, it's really physical distancing, in a lot of ways. So just being mindful of those things. There are countless, for years, decades, the way in which a lot of students succeeded in music programs specifically is they had private lessons. They would have their in-school band programs or however, but they would take private lessons, and that would kind of accelerate their learning. And historically, you would find that students that were in the district and the all-state band competitions and so forth, the secret ingredient to all of that was one-on-one instruction. And so, now we're in a position where an ensemble-based music curriculum has really migrated to this one-on-one individualized instruction. I should mention that in addition to those orchestra huddles, we're also providing every single child in the program with a half-hour private lesson a week to kind of drive home those individual instrument techniques that may be lost in the ensemble-based learning that we do. So, you have these students, and even I was one of them as a young student. I had a private teacher, and then you would audition for districts, and then everyone would prepare the music or not prepare the music, and they would show up to district festival, and they'd have 2 days to rehearse with a guest clinician, and they'd put a concert together. And I think in a lot of ways, this is really what I would imagine would happen, although I'm not encouraging, thrusting everyone in the society to gather in large groups and put together a 100-piece orchestra, straight after this. But I definitely feel like students are benefiting from the private lessons. I think there's, really clear window into what's happening and the value that music and arts organizations such as ours have, not only for music success, but social success for students. And I think that, we will still be in uncharted territories for the next year, and even more than that, because, the ramifications of this will ultimately kind of spill over into the next fiscal year for organizations and registration, and there'll be other challenges that we foresee, or that I would imagine we cannot foresee, that will come. But I think, and sorry, just to close that up, is I just feel like the resiliency and the growth mindset that our team is demonstrating right now, not only to ourselves, many of whom are learning these new virtual platforms and so forth, but also demonstrating to our students and to the families, to say that this fight is a lot greater and more powerful than anything that, COVID or, a pandemic can do to us, that we will still prevail, and we will continue to find new ways in which we can build community and connect with students and families. Yeah.
And I also think about issues of access. You're really developing best practices. We have no doubt that efforts have been made probably for decades, and once the technology presented itself to have online learning, that it's been available and it's been out there. But this has really forced us to really think about what are the best practices. Some of the straightforward things you were talking about, even sort of like all right, everybody touch your nose, in a way to focus attention, bring everybody together. And it occurs to me that there are lots of places, even here in Massachusetts. In fact, I've had an opportunity to speak with people who run community music schools in our more rural areas. They have a really hard time finding certain teachers of certain instruments. There's a scarcity in some parts of the state. Probably cello teachers, if you want to mention cello. So perhaps this is also, when we get really good at it, would make music lessons and a variety of music forms and instruments more available in places where it isn't now.
Yeah, there are pros and cons across the board. My son, seeing him get a private lesson, right now, which historically within his group at school, it wouldn't necessarily have been possible, or certainly to this degree, every week, half hour, committed, dedicated. That's really beautiful to see, the kind of positives that have come out of this. I hope that we are successful at this, but I hope that we're not that successful at it. There's nothing more powerful than coming together, and that's what we always believe in. But I do think that for certain areas like that, I saw something. Actually, Eric Booth, which I think will be with you tomorrow, shared something on Facebook, his personal channel, and it was kind of a unique perspective of just imagine. And he started to list all of these things. Despite these challenges, who knew we could provide testing kits for anyone that needed it if they were having a COVID symptoms and so forth. Who knew that we could provide opportunities for elderly individuals that need support at the grocery store, an hour of independent time where they could shop and have support from the clerks. Who knew that I guess in this particular case, to draw it back is who knew that we could in fact offer private lesson instruction to these rural communities. Who knew that Comcast at the drop of a hat would be willing to provide internet for everyone. And of course, this is with a crisis top of mind, and obviously people are throwing a lot of financial resources to make these things happen. But it is possible. So I think that there's it's important for all of us to continue to be eyes and ears and just see, of course, troubleshoot and make things happen, but also see what has emerged, from this, requirement to come together as a world.
Yeah, we do have a question from one of our listeners and watchers here. The question is, musicians have been hard hit by negative impact on the usual gig economy. And we did a survey of individual gig economy workers, and thousands and thousands of jobs have been lost, especially at a terrible time coming out of the winter, which is usually lean anyway. And when you're trying to sort of build back your resources and all of a sudden the door is slammed shut. The question is, has that affected any of the JQOP staff in any way?
That's a great question. You know, this is, when this first happened, this was the Tuesday before March 13th, which is basically the kind of the end of a program in so many ways. We as a board and organization looked at what we believed in, and of course, we're looking at students and families and how we can best serve them, but from an organization standpoint, my perspective as a freelance musician as well, that has worked for many years in that capacity prior to coming on board to JQOP, that was top of mind. How can we continue to support our teaching artists? We have 28 of them, and they all work in a part-time capacity. And what I told to them is for as long as we can and as much as we can, we're going to fight for you. We're going to maintain salaries. And what I would ask is that during this time, we look at job descriptions and see if there's opportunities. Of course, we're going to deliver content and private lessons, but can you do video editing? What are some soft skills that you could bring to the table? And the result of it was overwhelming. Of course, everyone said, I'm on board, thank you for supporting us, and we'll continue to move forward. But now we have virtual content on our website. We just, in addition to JQOP Online, which has all these resources and worksheets for our students, we've curated apps, free music apps for students to listen to. And I'll be honest, that there was definitely work that the administrative team put time into to build that site and so forth. But we asked the staff, what are apps that you use? What are some free apps that you like to use in your teaching and so forth? And we created a page for that. We also, recognized that tuning was going to be an issue for string students as the longer we go. And we also realized that, our base, as much as we teach, our students in English, and we have opportunities to translate in real time, there was a need to create tuning tutorials, not only in English, but in Mandarin, and in Spanish, and even in Haitian Creole, which is definitely a predominant languages within the Boston community. And so I think for our staff, it was looking at, well, what are some skills in which you can do? And so a lot of them, or all of them, really have come to the table and said, I'll curate a list of this. I can help out, here, doing a concert series as well. And so TAs are stepping up in that regard. So we stood behind our teaching artists during this really challenging time, and we're going to continue to do that. And those are some of the ways in which we've done that.
Amazing story to tell. I have one more question here I think I can fit in. This is from Zach Combs. Is it reasonable for an arts enrichment organization to offer alternate programming or digital content as a replacement for canceled jobs, as opposed to rescheduling next year? That way we could still pay the performers this spring. So it's that sort of trade-off that we're all contending with.
And the specific question is it like freelance musicians that maybe had a contracted service in March and has now been canceled or postponed? Would they move it to the fall instead?
Yeah, I think the question is, I think what we're seeing is, so there would be a paid gig, and Zach, I apologize if I'm misinterpreting your question. And since we can't do the paid gigs because we can't collect people in one place, that same product, that same work is being turned into digital content, which is essentially available for free. And is that a fair replacement for the canceled jobs, or would it be better to just postpone the concert until it can be presented later? Yeah,
I think that it's a difficult decision that each arts organization and any organization really has to decide. I guess I don't have a clear answer for that, aside from, right now what the world needs is, well, what the world needs are financial resources. But, in addition to that, the idea of of understanding that we're all in this together, and whatever we can offer in the interim to, like these songs of comfort, that we've seen on social media and so forth. And some of the work that we're trying to do is creating a space where we can still have this sense of joy and hope through music and through the arts. If specific organizations decide that they want to go virtual and offer it, then there are subscription platforms I'm sure that people can explore. The BSO is offering live streaming. The Philadelphia Orchestra is offering live streaming. There's a lot of large organizations that are, having to contend with canceled seasons, for all of their musicians. So I don't have a clear answer. I just would hope that each organization would kind of, do the best they can to do justice to the artists and talent that, that have stood by them in times when it wasn't a crisis.
And once again, I will remind the individual artists that after next Tuesday at our council meeting, we'll be rolling out a new program with some, not enough, I guarantee you, but some financial resources that are going to be available to individual artists. Chris, thank you so much for telling us about what you've been doing. It's amazing. You're staying connected with kids, you're building community, and you're making music all at the same time. Tomorrow, Eric Booth, who is an internationally acclaimed leader of the teaching artists world, will be with us at 1 o'clock. And in the meantime, we've posted links to a lot of the information that Chris has talked about on the chat. So please take a look at that. And thank you very much for being part of the Culture Chat today. And Chris, thank you for all you're doing.
Thank you so much. And if I can be of assistance at any point and share my contact information, I'm happy to be available at any point. And thank you, Karma, for sharing some of those links on the side. So there's tuning and a music tech app, or page rather, to check out at jqop.org. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.